the names of all these, but the Lahi, the Raktika zone,
Mhm.
Lakeland at night is so beautiful. That it brings tears to my eyes. The Shadowbringers theme itself is amazing.
Yes. And
I
how they
love
weave that into the boss fights at the end of the content.
Oh, it's so great. Now, I have a theory, a music theory in video games, especially RPGs, and that is when there are two themes that are intertwined, it makes for a better experience. And this game has it.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 29 of the Casually Hardcore podcast. My name is Brian, and joining us this week we have Paul, aka RubiconVale, from the Gather Together podcast, coming on officially. You've been and done some collabs with us before, both online and in person. Paul, introduce yourself for those who might not have heard of the Gather Together podcast. Tell us about everything you're working on, and then we're going to have a ton of fun.
Okay. All right, you got it. So my name is RubiconVale. I'm with the Gather Together podcast. We're a weekly podcast about Final Fantasy XIV, everything about Final Fantasy XIV that you can imagine. My co-host is Yelta Sumasu, and you can find us on our website, www.gtffxiv.com, or on Twitter at gtffxiv. We're on your favorite podcast streaming service, so check us out.
Absolutely, guys. Check out Gather Together. They're a phenomenal podcast. I really enjoy getting to sit back and just kind of relax and listen to you guys talk about the game. And on that, I got a couple of business things I want to kind of dive into real quick. So if you guys missed our last podcast, we had Chris Blevins on talking about Final Fantasy XI Classic and the streaming that streamers have, how they've impacted the industry and what we might hope for the future for Final Fantasy, as also it relates to the upcoming WoW Classic as well. You can also find this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, so be sure to catch us there in audio form if you are not joining us here live, or on YouTube when this podcast goes live. Also, we want to always thank our partnership with Exit Lag. Guys, the link will be in the description. If you're having any problems or you want to just check it out, you get 3 free days using the link below, or you can also use the code DOWORK for saving up to 20% off if you choose to sign up and check out that service. But, all right. Business has been concluded. Let's have a ton of fun. If you guys have not finished the story for Shadowbringers, we highly recommend maybe you come and check this podcast out in the future. This is spoiler podcast time, where we're going to be, we don't really know because we're just going to be reviewing the game, but the spoiler window has been lifted, and so we're free to talk about why we feel maybe the way we feel about a certain moment in the game itself. So without that, without further ado, Paul, when did you first feel Shadowbringers was different? I think this is a critical question.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. There were little bits and pieces, but that first visceral moment that I was like, oh my goodness, was when our friend turned and she became the Sin Eater and morphed, and it was disgusting and it was violent, and I loved every minute of it.
I was like, what was the rating of this game? like how do they get away with that? Like, it felt
There's
like
a quest giver that talks about a Moogle that is way more offensive than that. I don't know if you guys have been reading your quests, but this is
the one where you make the face where you're like,
yeah.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Character made the same face I did.
And what I thought about Moogles in Heavensward.
Yeah, there's a quest giver that says, I want to chop their little ball off, shove it down their I believe it's goddamn throat, and to choke on that shite. I believe.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god!
Like, how did that get approved?
This is so dark.
Chris, when did it?
Unlocking hunts. So same question to me. So obviously, Stormblood. I tried getting into the lore, and I just ultimately wasn't able to do it. and I skipped all the lore during Heavensward and ARR, and so Stormblood, I'd be fine, and then something would just get to where they were in a whole scene, and all these people were talking about who knows what, and I would just go back to skipping, and then the next content patch would come out, and I'd watch it until I got lost, and then I'd skip. And so I was only catching about half the story in Stormblood. So this time around, I don't know that I know when the lore was different, because I haven't invested in the lore like this before. What's different is that I was investing in the lore. So I just never hit that point where I got off the train. And so I kept waiting for, like, at some point we'll be back in the Rising Stones, maybe the first version, or we'll come across some first world Mordona, and then I'll be lost and I'll bail out and I can go hit level cap really quickly. And instead, about the time, probably 4 or 5 hours in, which is only like one combat sequence, I had gotten to the point where somebody said, "Aren't you going to skip story?" And I knew it was different by then, because somewhere along the line, I went from "I'm not skipping story" to "if you don't like that I'm not skipping story, you can leave." Like, which is not a feeling I've ever had towards this game. So something was inherently different here. I was really worried when the story got that good that the first dungeon wasn't going to be good. Yeah. So I think the first moment I realized the expansion was different was when I finished the 71 dungeon, and I was like, "Oh, this is good. This is amazing."
I think for me, to kind of answer my own question here, is that it was around level 73. And around that time, I'm working my way through the story. I'm just enjoying the content. Chris has been, like, actually outpacing me. He is further along in the story than I am. And then I'm also like, oh, he's not skipping. He's actually, like, watching it and he's engaged. I wonder, and I'm asking myself, I wonder if that's going to keep up. Because at some point, like, I've played with Chris, I've known him for 12 years. Like, at some point, like, will the escape key win? And around level 73 for me, like, I've done the dungeon, I've done the second dungeon, I go, this is better than Heavensward. Like, and Heavensward for me was the pinnacle in the games so far. And I was like, it can't, like, how is that possible? Like, I'm not even at cap. Like, that seems a little bit premature, but that's how I feel immediately. And then I started, like, just enjoying it, and I decided that I was just going to sit back and appreciate it, and I was just going to just linger in that emotion of really just enjoying this game. And so it really, like, 73 was like, I would say, yeah, this is better than Heavensward, but then I was still questioning that, like, no, there's no way, like, that was so good. And so that's really where that started for me. Right after that second dungeon, the feeling was persistent. Like, the world, the zone, everything like that was just, like, really just, I was loving every second of it. But around level 73, I was like, holy crap, this could actually be the best expansion we've had to date. And then I'll say it here, and we'll jump into the main topic, which is the review. And the question that I'd love to have you guys answer as we kind of review the different segments. This feels like it's probably the best Final Fantasy game easily in a decade, perhaps even the last 2 decades. Like, it's just incredible. It gives me such hope for the future. So, any additional thoughts, Paul, on, like, Shadowbringers feeling different before we jump into the main review?
I would ask you to, since you both had a similar experience about the storyline, did you use trusts throughout the storyline, or did you party with other people the first time?
I'll let Chris go.
I did not plan on using trusts, because having gone to the media tour, the trust was so much slower than running blind with other players. I was running with other players who weren't playing on their home system, players who actively realized keybinds were wrong mid-pull and were clicking off of their action menu. Mm-hmm. So because it was literally me and, like, Avalon Star goes, "You okay back there?" I'm like, "No, sorry, still dragging abilities on bars," like, mid-pull. So knowing it was faster, I did not plan on doing trusts. And I got to that very first dungeon, and the Exarch was standing there. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm running with a trust." like, come on. Come on.
And that's what Chris said. He's like, I was like, "Oh, you're running with the trust." I was like, "That's interesting," because I was like, and he's like, "Oh, just wait." And I was like, and then I got to that exact point, and I go, "Oh yeah, I'm running with this guy." I have to, like, because it's like I hadn't seen him before. I was like, okay, this would be cool. And so I did. The only trust that I actually ran was the level 71. I haven't touched it yet, and I know you have to actually grind up your trust to be able to do the content. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll get to that. I don't know.
Right. So I did them. I did them all throughout. Partially because I had an odd play schedule, partially because I wanted to see how seamless the story would be. It felt so much like a Final Fantasy, a solo, single player Final Fantasy. Ridiculous. And I think that's really what sealed the deal when I started the 71 dungeon and then, the gruesome cutscene. There was just no stopping. There was no, I had to go look for people, had to do something else. So to get absorbed completely in that story, the trust really adds a lot to that experience.
Agreed. And that's actually really good to hear that you kind of had that experience, because I don't like the way that they've set up trusts isn't to take away from playing multiplayer, but it's to offer that as an option. And that's what I think the game really excels at, and what hopefully we'll continue to see it excel at. For some reason, my voice is cracking today. It's been a busy day. But hopefully we get to see that kind of where the game just continues to offer like unique and interesting options to the players, rather than saying this is the way you play it. No, okay, like here's how you can go and enjoy this game as a solo experience. I think the problem with trusts is kind of a problem that Final Fantasy XIV kind of faces right now. Like when you look at any of the negative critique that the game faces, like I kind of posted up just recently about the lazy peon. We've invited him onto the podcast. But he doesn't like the leveling experience. He doesn't really enjoy the game. And then you look at somebody like Skill Up, who's just going through the whole game. He set out to review it. I'm looking forward to his review maybe in October. It took him over 87 hours, and he's just at 87 hours he finally crossed into Heavensward, because he's trying to also experience everything. He really wants to like review the game and get like have that true understanding. So there's two contrasting people who are kind of diving into it. The problem is though, regardless, I'm bringing this back to trust, is like ARR, Heavensward, Stormblood, like the features that are a part of Shadowbringers ultimately need to make their way in some way. Like a Realm Reborn at some point needs to be a Realm Remade. Like they have to figure out a way to bring some of that in, because there are those barriers. You're going to have people who agree with the lazy peon in this case. I actually have no fault in somebody who not liking this game, because there are two major hurdles in this game for its enjoyment right now, and it's the 30 to 49 grind, and it's the 2.1 to 2.55 like 100 quest grind to get into Heavensward. Like there's a couple of things, and I think trust would like add so much to that. And so that's actually the problem I see with trust is not that they exist. It's just that they don't exist everywhere. And if they would bring in your squads, or like there's so many, like I cannot wait to see how they solve this problem, because they are obviously very well aware of the problem, and we're only starting to see that problem as more and more people jump in, and they're like, how much do I have to do to get into Shadowbringers? Like if that's the best Final Fantasy game ever, like there's a lot of investment that a player is going to have to make in it. Paul, you look like you have a thought.
Yeah, well, just my final thought on trust, only that I was surprised at the end of trust, the whole level up thing. I thought it was going to be 71, you get the Crystal Exarch and these ones, level 73, yada, yada, so on and so forth. I did not know that you would go back with the remaining ones, but that gives me hope, or a silver lining for what you're talking about. They're experimenting with some system that they have a leveling, you can level them up, you can do things with. If they expand upon that, that tells me they may think about dragging that to the past. And that might be something for a Realm Reborn, which my ultimate idea for them is that they're thinking of making this a single player experience throughout.
Chris.
At some point.
That would be very long term, because our interview question was directly, will trust be backwards compatible? And the answer was explicitly and completely, because of technical reasons, absolutely not. It was not an intent thing, just like with people when we talk about data center wide market boards. Their intent is to have a data center-wide market board with World Visit. They have gone as far as they can go with technical limitations as of now. So people who are like, well, World Visit's allowing people to go around and shop the whole data center. Yeah, like that is their goal. If they could make it even more so, you would literally just go search for, lightning crystals, and you would get hundreds of pages of lightning crystals. Right. That is their intent. So I think that there's something incredibly interesting about trusts, and I hope they can find a way to take features of it and go update squadrons. I think that's the logical, because then you've covered kind of, squadrons have a lot of dungeons they're allowed to run. So if they can maybe separate the beginning of squadrons from grand companies and just kind of feed it to brand new players, especially if they could find a way to do it. And I don't know that they ever would. I think it would always be limited to the 4-mans. But if they could find a way to script it into those MSQ raids, so that you're sitting in there for an hour, and if you want to skip cutscenes or enjoy cutscenes, it doesn't matter. It's your journey. Because right now they're trying to dangle a ton of experience in front of us, but at no point is anybody fooled into thinking that they have the opinion this is fun. Like
that's the big problem. I'm concerned because people keep saying like, oh, you got to do MSQ roulette, like you're getting so much experience. I'm like, it's not worth me being soured over this game, being frustrated because like, okay, I enjoy the different links of content. It gives me that expectation. In no way am I like, yeah, let me burn 45 minutes to an hour on that specific content. Not that it's bad, but it's just like I just know that ultimately I'll end up leaving it being upset and frustrated because it's like, well, that took forever. And the fights, we're like, one of the things that's interesting about the battle system changes is I feel like we're OP as F when it comes to like previous content. Like I am melting things down. I think everybody is melting. I haven't experienced anything that's synced that felt as challenging as it ever did when it was current. Like now I'm like, yeah, like there's no need. We're good. Just run in. Just there's a fun feeling to that because I do feel like I'm a superpowered, badass. But it's just like ultimately I'm like, yeah, like these fights are going to melt down pretty fast. The gate is that you're going to watch these cutscenes. I think trust squads, whatever they want to integrate that as a whole system will solve the problem. But it's all a concept of technical debt. Like they want to go in that direction. How long is it going to take them to be able to achieve that? And can they do that without sacrificing? Like, oh, we didn't get any dungeons this expand. What's the trade-off in which that it's necessary, but we don't want to necessarily, hurt ourselves. All right, guys, let's talk about and review Shadowbringers. We've all finished the story. We've all spent a good amount of time with this expansion. Chris is making money hand over fist. He's put out a video on it. He keeps updating me. I'm like, I'm not actively going about it because I'm like, okay, that's great for you, Chris. And he's like, well, I'm at 10 million. Well, I'm at 20 million. Well, I'm just like, get to 100 million. Get to 100 million, dude. Like,
it's excessive. I went and spent, I don't know, 5 million gil in one go to try to test out the materia in my recent guide. I was like, this might be over the limit. Like there might be an amount of money where this theory doesn't work anymore. And I just bought 5 million gil worth of materia. That's thousands and thousands of materia. Thank God for Chocobo saddlebags. And then I sat at Unimix for, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 episodes of Designated Survivor. And it's a good show on Netflix. It's a solid.
I'm happy to see that it actually went to Netflix because I watched it once at my dad's house and I was like, oh, I'll watch this again. And then I don't have cable and I was like, and then all of a sudden I saw that Netflix picked it up. Anyway.
It's not so good I would watch it with idle hands, but I'll watch it while transmuting materia.
Yeah.
And that's their target demographic. Are you playing a video game in a really boring way?
Would you like to pair? Yeah.
So story, are we talking about story first?
We're talking about story first. So here's the categories that we're going to be breaking down and how we're going to base our review. And we're going to go category by category. There's we could put scores to it. Ultimately, we're going to kind of gauge off of Paul. So if he rates it with letters, we'll rate it with letters. If he rates it with numbers, we'll rate it with numbers. If he rates it by ice cream scoops, that's the way this review will work. Because honestly, my personal opinion is that letters and number, all those things, there's no normalization. It doesn't mean anything, but we put so much value into whatever we end up saying. So that's how we're going to do it. We're going to go off a story. Then we're going to talk about gameplay, battle system changes as one category. Then we're going to talk about environments and the world design as another category. Then we're going to talk about the audio. And finally, we're going to talk about what Shadowbringers got right and what it got wrong, in its execution. And that's going to be essentially the meat of this podcast. Let's start with story, and let's start with you, Paul. Story, what are the highs, what are the lows? What stood out to you? Is this the best Final Fantasy You take over.
The greatest Final Fantasy that was ever penned by Lord Shakespeare. It's a really great Final Fantasy. It does border on possibly the greatest Final Fantasy story. Final Fantasy Tactics will always hold a flame in my heart. So dark, but this is very dark as well. There were some things I thought it would go in a direction, but because of my own preconceived notions, and it didn't go that direction, I was a little, but it was still good. So, despite what I felt the story should have went, I'm going to give it 5 Great Serpents of Ronka out of 5 Great Serpents of Ronka. It was fantastic. It went everywhere I thought it should go. It had a lot of emotion, a lot of sadness. Saw a lot of people on my Twitter feed saying they cried many, many tears. It was strong, and it made me feel like a hero, where Stormblood did not. We walked into Stormblood feeling already we were on cloud 9. I never felt any kind of major struggle. In this, there were moments that I was mad. I was very angry at the way that the story went, and it's a typical story. You're going to crash. Something bad's going to happen. You got to have a rally back. But I still was upset when those things happened. So I was emotionally invested. It was great.
5 Ronka, Serpents of Ronka. Got it. Awesome. That's our scale. All right, Chris, what about you?
So, I mean, I've talked about it a lot before here on the channel. I don't find time for single player games anymore because I don't have the amount of time to play with my friends, especially as you get older and your friends are all over the world. You end up online games is this really unique way to hang out with them. And so I don't have enough time to spend with friends, and I don't have enough time to play games, and I've combined the two, which means I'm always questioning why I would play a single player game over a multiplayer game when I can share that experience with somebody that I haven't gotten to visit with about what's going on in their life and just hang out. Even if we don't talk about life, even if we just talk crap for a few hours, like there's something about fostering that relationship that single player games just don't do for me anymore. And so I never find time. But the cost of that, and I didn't realize it until I played Shadowbringers, is that I haven't been told a good story in probably a decade. Outside of film or another medium where I go there for that purpose. In a video game, I've always settled for, well, you have to appeal to a broad audience, and so that means you can't single any one of us out and really connect, as opposed to something like an Octopath Traveler, which I wanted to spend more time with, a Kingdom Hearts, which I wanted to spend more time with, Zelda games, which I always want to spend more time with, other Final Fantasy games, which I always want to spend more time with. I expect those to have a good story, but I never finish them anymore because I go back to multiplayer games. So I expect them to always be a little bit dampened, and that's not what happened here. And so it's why, like, I had to wonder, I was like, maybe I was just lucky. Maybe they wrote a story and it just connected with me, and this is the one MMO that I'll like, and the next one will connect with somebody different than me, and that'll be okay. And I felt really blessed and lucky that how cool that I got an expansion that spoke to exactly where I'm at in my life. I hope everybody can experience what I did. And then I found out it's like, no, they're having the same experience with Shadowbringers that I did, even though they're from a totally different walk of life. So I don't know how you write a story like that into a multiplayer game where you've got people with kids that are connecting, you've got people without kids that are connecting, you've got people who've never played video games before connecting, you've got people who have decades of just jaded, this is what to expect from a game, that it just breaks right through. Like there wasn't anybody that this couldn't capture. And that's pretty incredible. So I don't know how we go forward without redefining what an MMORPG can be.
Right. 100%. So how many Great Serpents of Ronka do you give it, Chris?
5 of 5, knowing that later I can nitpick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with my score, which would be 5 Great Serpents of Ronka out of 5, obviously. The what really stood out to me was, like, especially coming off of like Stormblood, like I didn't feel like Stormblood had a satisfying conclusion. I didn't really connect with a lot of the conflict within it. There were some parts in it that I really enjoyed. There were some character moments that I enjoyed in Stormblood. But I think the fact that it was, like, I look at Stormblood as it was necessary to get us to Shadowbringers, because like you had this conflict that was spread out over 2 continents, that you kind of had these 2 different stories and worlds. And so it was kind of like, oh, and this ends up being the patch where I'm here, and this is the patch where I'm over here. Oh, that's concluded. Okay, now we can kind of go back to that. It did feel a little like I was kind of bouncing back and forth, and I didn't necessarily feel the scope or the scale of the world, because everybody kind of was dealing with a lot of their own things, with obviously the exception being the Return to Yblis raid. I thought they like nailed that in Stormblood. So I'm really excited to see how it kind of how Nier kind of gets integrated with Shadowbringers here in a couple months. But the reason for 5, like I thought, like from a narrative, the characters and their interactions, the concept that they kind of played around with time, and the fact that there could be this thread of time where the 8th Umbral Calamity has happened, where the Warrior Light was killed, that still exists because the Exarch still exists in our line. That was kind of an interesting kind of thing. I wonder if something will ever come about that, or if that's just going to be like our way of explaining why the Exarch didn't vanish into thin air and thus repeat the whole process, because if there was nothing to, if he had to come back to change it and we prevented it, it prevented him from coming back in the first place, which caused it, which, so it's like time is fun. I like kind of how they kind of played around with that, because at least I felt it was respectful to us. Because one of the things that really pissed me off from a Final Fantasy game was 13-2, where everybody knows what what a paradox is. Oh, you mean just take a left at the paradox, like down the road? Like, you should not know that there's a paradox, people. Like, that's the concept. The person who's traveling through time should only be the one who aware of when a paradox has occurred, because that's not how it happened, and something changed, and thus. But anyway, everybody was aware that their paradoxes were happening. Anyway, that's a nitpick on a different game. But I think it was a love story. I think Emmett Selk provided the best villain and adversary that we've seen that us face, because I think with him and like with Ranjit and even Lord Vothri, all 3 of them were relatable. Their motives were, I think, set in a natural sense, not a supernatural sense, but a natural feeling of love, of duty, of fear. And that's what they were rooted in with it. Like with Ranjit, the reason why he was like opposition was he was afraid of losing another mini Menphilia. Like, and to the point where it's like he just can't handle it. So that's why he is against us. Lord Vothri, like, he was corrupted in the womb by Emmett Selk, but his whole life he's grown up and been told that he is the savior of the realm. And thus you end up looking at him, and then he has the power to control the Sin Eaters. There has been nothing in his world that has shown him that what he is not doing is not righteous and just and good. And so there's the conflict within him there. Now, obviously, we have the scale in which that it's like, no, like, you're going about it in the wrong way. And then with Emmett Selk, like, he is motivated by fear of being forgotten, by mourning of this of his lost society, and then how he's created all these like atrocities. But like, his best line, the best moment in this is when he says, remember that we lived. And the best gift that the Warrior of Light that we gave Emmett Selk was when we nodded and said, okay, we will remember. That gave Emmett Selk this gift of peace to somebody who might not necessarily, based off his genocides, have been deserving of it. But it literally was a great and epic moment, in history of the game itself. So honestly, I think as a villain, he was the most the opposite side of us. Like, his motivations, like, from his perspective, were just, and he was doing good, and he's fighting against us, who in his mind, because he's not doing it for fame or for power. He's doing it because he lost his loved ones. And then the moment that I also really enjoyed was when we sat down with his friend, because he created the city and put his, the Ascians back in it. And his friend was there, and he's like, I guess there was a moment, because I'm aware of what's going on. I'm the only one who is. Because when he thought of me while he created me, maybe it stopped him from making me unaware. And it's like his friend wanted us to save Emmett Selk. He's like, because he recognizes, like, no, this is not how he is. But over 1,000 years, like, that's just, it couldn't have been more perfect. And I've been talking with Chris about the lore of this game. And Chris was able to pick up some things that I even completely, like, missed. And I was like, that makes so much sense. that is so interesting and intricate to the story itself. And
What are some examples?
Chris.
What is...
So Brian didn't read all the quests explicitly during Aether Currents.
Yeah.
And so really what we were talking about there is when you're going through the Tempest and you're studying the Aether Currents, you get a lot deeper understanding of Ascians. You get a deeper understanding of them in this almost Garden of Eden. And that, I mean, not all Ascians are equal. So they have this kind of patent office for when you have an idea about something you want to create. And then they can farm that out to Ascians of greater power if it's deemed a good idea. But maybe you don't have the ability to create that thing, right? So you're the Ascian that thinks of what a giraffe should be. Well, you can't create a giraffe because you just don't have that level of creation. That can be farmed out. And as you kind of get a feel for this, there's interesting rules and binds. And so I hope the Tempest as a zone gets a lot more developed to kind of explain that to us, because like you had to go somewhere to get your robes distributed to you. They sent you off. They said, don't dress like that in public, child. Go somewhere to get your robes made. But then it's like, you can make mobs for me to fight, but you can't make my robes. And so there's just these, so like the uniqueness and like there's this
bureaucracy, the system they built because of that power of creation.
And it's a huge bureaucracy, and it's what makes them inherently different than like the Alligans, and it's why, and then their view of the other races. So I don't know what I was learning from MSQ and what I was learning from Aether Currents, because I've read every quest at every point in here, so I don't have the ability to separate them. But it's just interesting to think about the Ascians as like, they saw this thing happening, right? This kind of calamity incoming in another part of the world. And they basically said, we don't want to get involved in World War II, right? We don't want to get involved in this. It's not our problem. And somebody goes, well, we might have a solution, but we're not sure if it's going to work. So what we'll do is we'll create our solution. And then I think they thought that Zodiark was going to be a lot more compartmentalized. I think they said, okay, we've got this atomic bomb. We're going to go drop it in the first metaphorical, like Japan, to kind of end this conflict. And then if it doesn't work, that's fine. It was in Japan. Like, it's not our problem. And so they knew that it was reckless, but they decided it was worth doing somewhere else. It was worth affecting somebody else's livelihood. And I think that the effect and the cost was a lot greater than anything they could have expected. And then by the time it got time to pay the tab and you sacrifice half of all Ascians to form Zodiark, you've got this group of people that are like, I don't know that this was a good idea. I don't know that giving Zodiark this much of us is something that long-term we can trust. And then that's how you end up basically doing a mini sundering again, and you end up with another half of them, right? So now a quarter go into Heidelin. And there's some interesting math there, because it took half of all Ascians to form Zodiark, and then it took half of the remaining half to create Heidelin. Right? So you've got a quarter of Ascians going into Heidelin, assuming there's no massive population growth there. And then Heidelin wins out over Zodiark. So is that just a tie of, I don't understand how primals, is the amount of faith that a person contributes to a primal binary, or is it something that scales? So if I believe twice as much as you do, I contribute more, because that quarter of Ascians made something more powerful than the half that sacrificed themselves for something that they thought.
Well, maybe that's why we had the sundering in the first place, because the fact that like they fought, and maybe Zodiark was obviously the more powerful of them because of that, like of your math in this regards. But what Heidelin possessed was the ability to divide. Like, it's like literally like, okay, and thus the way that she was able to win wasn't by defeating him. Zodiark isn't defeated, he is locked away, and that's why we had the sundering, and that's why the Ascians are so adamant about bringing back Zodiark, because essentially if they do that, to your point, their whole plan was to do the rejoinings and then to sacrifice the source so that Zodiark would actually bring back all the Ascians, as opposed to like sacrifice the source to actually formally bring about Zodiark. All the rejoinings have to be doing is complete, thus Zodiark is returned, because he is locked away behind, I guess, the dimensional sundering that Heidelin occurred, and maybe that was the play all along. That's just my thoughts, because it's interesting math based. Go ahead, Paul.
I think the symbolism is really what's apparent here, because the symbolism of this race of people dividing themselves to create a god of division, to separate it. I there's a lot to be said of the metaphors throughout this story. That
Mhm.
is one very small metaphor throughout. The apathy that these Asians had versus the themes of love that are apparent throughout this story. Amelsek's love for the past, the nostalgia, his people, the Warrior of Darkness's love for his friends and trying to make what was right. There's so many different examples. In fact, I believe that all of the Light Wardens are named after Greek names of love. There is an ongoing love theme. I'd have to look up those names, but there is some really deep metaphors about love.
Well, I mean, you have there's agape,
That's-
there's many different words for love. I'll have to double check because I didn't notice it, but I wouldn't put it past him for doing something like that.
It's interesting in the context of this. So I mean, us being American, we're very well aware of the fact that it tackles. It's a very in Stormblood, it felt like they were trying to politically charge it overtly, like it was a PSA, like it was like Captain Planet. Like there were these moments where it's like, we're making a statement. And I didn't really, I think that's why I didn't engage with Stormblood, is I felt like they were trying to tell me something that I didn't want to listen to. But here I felt like there was so much conviction in things. And in the United States, we're aware of racism versus that kind of subtle racism. And so when Emmett Selk he honest to goodness does not believe we're capable of love. He honest to goodness believes we are inferior beings to the point where killing us is not murder.
It's mercy.
We literally, and you see it in the real world, so you can connect with it when there's this group of people that either because of their mental capabilities or their social status or their race or their religion or their gender believe that they are above another group to the point where I should make decisions for you because I am so right that I can not only take care of myself, I can take care of you, and I will do it better than you can.
Yeah, I am that superiority complex.
Kill us off.
Yeah, and that's how he justifies it. But at the same time, visibly, you see it weighing on him. And if you look at it once he's finally defeated, and the Warrior of Light gives him the mercy of yes, I will remember you. Ultimately, what he was afraid of, kind of his root motivation. He's standing tall. That's the first time you actually see Emmett Selk not slumped over. And it's so there is that. So I agree 100% with what you're saying, Chris. But he has to do that. He has to justify it. If you're going to murder, billions of people, how many people are on these shards?
As part of your step, not an ultimate, this is the ultimate solution. When I'm done murdering this realm, I'm going to go to another one.
And do it again. And that just has to weigh on him. And so you have to mentally, and you see this just like Chris was kind of alluding to, in the real world, where the studies, the psychology is okay, we have to make you think you're better than this group. And because then you're the one, well, it's a mercy. It's a mercy for me to wipe out this shard because they're not real. And whatever they experience is a falsehood, as opposed to because we're aware of the truth and the real and etc. And it's essentially that extremism that Final Fantasy always kind of toys around with. It always wards against that extremism and that justification for genocide, as opposed to maybe there's a better way. And honestly, that's where I think maybe the story might go, because when you think about it, when I experience, and let's jump into the gameplay. We'll come back to gameplay. Let's talk about environments and world design. When I'm experiencing the environments in the world of the first, I've been telling Chris, why the hell do I want to go back to the source? Bring the first to the source. Ultimately, I'm now on the side of the rejoining, but can we do it without mass genocide? That's what I would love to see. And so for me, from the environments and the world design, hands down, 5 Serpents of Ranka, Great Serpents of Ranka out of 5, because there is not a zone that I stepped in and I said, could have been better. The music, the tone, I love the fact that it was light only until we were able to do different things. That was amazing. And just the fantasy setting, it really took it above and beyond. It really kind of went to that high fantasy. They brought in the fairies. They brought in, we knew there were dwarves the whole time, but Lalafell are dwarves. I loved the classic setting. I loved everything about the environments and the world design, and I love it every time I could be out. Like anytime I'm in queue for anything, I'm out in the world running Fates. I'm out in the world just like experiencing the world. I've gone to my house just a handful of times, and that's so different from Stormblood. That is so different from anything else. I am a man of the first. Because it's so beautiful. Paul,
it's also jarring when you go back to the source and you've spent so much time in the first. It was for me. If I was doing long stretches of quests and then I'm like, oh, let me go back to my retainer, or let me go to the gold saucer. It seemed gaudy. It was like everything just didn't look right. I wanted to go back to that alien world.
So break down. What are the thoughts you have on environments in the first, so that way we can also give it a score too.
Yeah. Well, I'll give it 5 out of 5 because I loved every single zone that was in this. I never felt like it was out of place. I didn't think that they were, too small or too vast. In fact, one thing I thought that was pretty interesting was when I was doing the quest. In some zones, I did all the quests. In some zones, I didn't. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I was led toward the aether currents. I forgot I had the compass for the longest time. And I was just kind of going with the flow, and I hardly found flying before I got to the Tempest and finished the story. So I didn't feel like I was led to any specific spots, but I still felt like it was leading me on this journey, and I got to visit and view all of these beautiful areas. I thought the entire world was brilliant, and that's why it seemed so weird to just get pulled out of it, to go do other things. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay as long as.
Do you have a favorite zone?
If I'm excluding music, I guess I have to include music. It would have to be the woods, the Great Forest.
Rak'tika.
Rak'tika. I love it so much. The music really goes over the top for me. Lahi, as it's known right now, and the old 1.0 music. One thing about some of the zones here is they use some really good 1.0 music. So that zone really captured my heart.
Chris,
I have to keep them honest here because the zones are something that was a pain point in Stormblood that as good as they were during the leveling experience, they were then underutilized for the next 2 years. So I'd give them a 4 out of 5 because I want them to ask what else they can do. I want that feedback box to pop up in the comment that says, how can we improve our user experience? Because if I type 5 out of 5, you're going to go, awesome, we're done. Because you're not done. There were multiple groups that I'd like to see as beast tribes. I would like a beast tribe with every content patch this time around. If it were up to me, I think we'd get 4 or 5. I just think there's so many opportunities to explore things so much deeper, and things are allowed to work almost illogically because we're in the first. And so you can kind of explore alternate reality in the same way that we do with like a relic grind, where if at the end it doesn't make sense, it's okay. We're gonna flush it out of the system and move on to 6.0. And so there's a chance to say, well, what if? And then if you, at the end of that story arc, you don't like the outcome, that's fine. That was the first version, and then we can go on. So I think there's a really unique opportunity to explore, what if our character was different? What if the ones that came before us were illogical? And I would like to see more of that. Rak'tika was my favorite from leveling. I think once you add flight into the mix, I find it a little more tedious. So I'll probably, I think as of now, with all the leveling I've been doing, Ilmeg's probably my favorite out in the world. But Rak'tika was just so immersive when you were there. The way the light played, especially when light was kind of always at the forethought of your mind, there was just something incredible about that. So I'd have to give it a 4 or 5 because I don't think they're done, especially with the Tempest. The Tempest is a great start, but you did not give us Ascians so that we could kill off Emmett Selk and then not touch them again. We need to do so much more in that zone. And the fact that there is so little used out of the Tempest compared to the other zones, and the fact that it is not this logical, almost 3-part story, tells me in my mind that it is the perfect testing grounds to give us level 80 only content, give us unspoiled nodes as a gathering beast tribe, give us something super engaging that is entirely geared at in-game players. They've made it so easy to level crafters and gatherers. They've made it so easy to level your battle classes with scaling quests and things. Give me an endgame zone that's just in-game. And I usually don't like those, but I think that might be what they're teeing us up for.
For me, I would say Ilmeg. And I also love the phasing that they introduced with this expansion. So the first time you go in it, like the zone itself is also very foggy. Like the fairies are playing with you and messing with your head. Then when that goes down, then it's like obviously light, and now you have it where it's got light and darkness. So their use of phasing in some of the zones was really quite interesting. That allowed you to go in it and then have a different experience. And then as you progress through the story and you actually make progress with that, the zone is, opens up more, and it's just, oh gosh, it's just so freaking beautiful. I love the whole fairy sequence. So like that was for me was something really surprising and shocking, because I was like, okay, yeah, fairies, that might be annoying. I was like, no, I thought they really nailed the voices for them and then everything like that. So overall, very excited about the zones. But Chris brings up a couple good points, and that kind of moves us into kind of gameplay and the battle system changes itself. Because because I haven't finished all the zones, but I've been making my way as I rank up with fates in them, and then the fact that like right now it just caps out at rank 3. I hope ultimately that we see from a gameplay perspective that they continue to improve upon that, because I love that. It's motivating. Just like Chris said, like I like playing a multiplayer game because you're kind of doing the social thing and you're playing a game. You're getting 2 for 1. So with the fates itself, I'm getting XP, but I'm also earning this currency and I'm also ranking up. Like it feels like I'm doing a lot with that time. It feels very rewarding and valuable. And so gameplay wise and the battle system changes wise, I'm going to come in, like I've been playing around. I was doing Titania Extreme and running with the white mage, and like as a scholar, like I'm starting to see like, wow, like white mages were out DPSing me 2 to 1, and I'm just casting. And I'm like, yeah, I think we're probably going to see some adjustments. Voice cracked again. I think we'll probably continue to see some of those adjustments. I'm not going to fault them for that though. So for me, I'm just head over heels in love with it. I would say 5 Great Serpents of Raqqa out of 5, namely because they're going to make changes. The fact is, like, I think Aether Flow needs to be able to be used out of combat. I think that there's some things astrologians aren't necessarily very happy right now. I don't know if that's a potency thing or if that's just going to be like, if that's going to have to be like, and now we've redesigned Astro in 6.0. Who knows where that's going to go. But I think ultimately a lot of people are real satisfied with the new jobs. I think a lot of people are really happy with the changes. Chris and I kind of differ on the tanking. I haven't hit level cap on Paladin yet, but I'm getting close. I'm at 77, and I think from a threat perspective, tanking is just stupid easy. It has no skill required. It's you manage your mitigation when it comes down to the content, and that's going to be where the skill gap is. It's all about managing your cooldowns, and we see that in Titania EX. But when it comes down to the threat management, there is none in this game. Nobody can rip threat off me. I do not care who you are. You can't do it. And I've never seen, like, it's just, and I don't like that. Where I fall, but I don't think it's enough to take off a point. Paul.
Yeah, right now I'm going to give it 4 out of 5, and only because I'm not far enough to see everything fleshed out, and I believe there are going to be potency changes. You play Summoner, right, Brian?
Yeah.
Is your Summoner 80? How do you feel about Summoner? Have you done that?
Summoner, I feel really good about. I like the changes. I like how fast it feels getting into my rotations, and so I am head over heels in love with it. I've actually though been more doing Scholar, which has been a little bit of a shock because I've just enjoyed playing it so much. I really do and that's where it's like the one change I make. Summoner though, like with Bahamut and with Phoenix, and just getting into my rotation, being able to feel like I'm putting out a lot of damage, I really like it. And so like my whole thing this week is to hopefully start rolling out some of the controller guides and different kind of like rotation guides to kind of start getting that going out this week. But yeah, I think I love it. I love Summoner.
I'm still working on my rotation, and so maybe part of it is me just trying to flesh things out, but I'm finding some of the double weaves difficult. I'm finding some of the changes that were made to it, I guess maybe more difficult to my muscle memory than anything else. Mm-hmm. As I work through it, that score may increase, but right now I'm getting some hand cramps on Summoner that I wasn't quite getting before, and I'm trying to work through that.
There's definitely some changes I would make.
Some major ones. Now I do like Phoenix, and I like the changes that came with that. Because I felt like it balances things out, but there's still that long period where you're just ruining 3 over and over and over and over, and I thought it was going to balance some of that out. But there's plenty of other jobs. I did tell myself I was going to play ranged a lot more in this mentioned. So I do plan on doing Bard, I believe, next, and trying to see how that goes. But 4 out of 5 just right now, because I think that there's more that I can discover, and I think that there's going to be some potency changes that'll come through the works. Everything else felt good though, and we still have things coming up like Eden,
that's going to be the big test. Like when it comes down to the raid, like the extremes give us a good example of where they're thinking about it. I know as when I'm doing Scholar, I'm healing a lot more, and I actually really like that. But that's all going to be varying off of people's gear, and who knows. But I know like Chris can't, as a warrior, live forever. So Chris, I want to toss to you because I could do a whole podcast on what I would change about the jobs that I'm playing. But Chris, go ahead.
So all I've played a little bit of Dancer, a fair bit of Gunbreaker, and I've played a ton of Warrior. So that's where I'm coming from here. So a little bit different than you guys. My fear was that tanking would be made really easy from an enemy standpoint, and that would make the game boring. Step 1 of that came true. Step 1 of that, it could not be easier to get threat. As a matter of fact, if I'm struggling with threat, it's because I don't have the button on. You can click the easy button at any time you want. The moment you click the easy button, immediate automatic threat on everything. It's literally an easy button. It's a 1-button press. It's got like a couple second cooldown, so you can toggle it on and off to your heart's content. If you're with strangers, leave it on. If you're with friends, it's kind of fun to see if I can keep it without easy button on, because it was not designed to be doable. So there is constant threat being ripped off of you, and it's a lot of fun. But don't do it without a healer and some DPS. That like the DPS are going to back off on things for you, and the healer is going to keep people alive when it starts hitting non-tanks. So it makes things a little more exciting than it should be. I like the battle system changes. If you had asked me June 27th what I thought the highest score this game could get from a battle system changes out of 5, I would say it's 4 out of 5. You cannot get a 5 out of 5 on launch, because on launch you don't have your first raid, you don't have your first Savage, they don't do PTRs, so you have no public opinion going back to the devs that they're going to respond to. So like changes and context are lacking on the expansion drop, and that means somebody's going to hate their job. Like at least one class is going to hate their job. And then the question is, do they hate their job long term, right? Are they the equivalent of Shadowbringers Machinist, where, Stormblood's Machinist, where all of Shadowbringers, it's like, so if by 5.2 you still hate your job, you should probably try another job.
Machinist is amazing, though. I'm just going to jump in and say that. I was playing it, and I was laughing. Right, but still, like, the changes to Machinist, like, that's why I drafted it, because I was so impressed with it out of the media tour. So I was like, I'm totally good Machinist. We went into a run, and I was playing as Machinist, and I think I'm, like, laughing maniacally, because, like, I'm parsing it. I'm like, my numbers, guys, are insane. Just like, I was just blowing.
Single biggest regret out of my draft is that I didn't get Machinist. Single biggest regret, but that's fine. I got a lot of other good ones to be excited about. I'm excited.
He did.
So speaking on the battle system, to kind of wrap that up, I'm really happy with the changes because of the second part, that context. The dungeons are so good. By the time you get to the last MSQ dungeon, was that Amaro or whatever that's called? Mm-hmm. Sheer size of those pulls, and the fact that I was with a group that was all blind and we were still multi-pulling, my advice in the guide was don't multi-pull, because I didn't feel that I had control at any time. It was constantly, oh my God, is my next defensive going to be up in time? I was having to back away from things so that they missed their swing, because if I'd been hit one more time, I would have died. So I was running around in circles, letting the healer get that last cast off. The moment I was back above half-life, I was turning around, charging back in. It was just sheer chaos. And it was like, I was laughing. It's some of the most fun I've had in a long time, is how challenging the dungeons are. I'm a little worried about, will the game hold up when gear suddenly makes that no longer a challenge, when chain pulling and repetition wins out? But as of now, I could not be happier with the battle system, at least as a warrior. I feel good. And I think it's for the best that I can no longer pull without you guys. Yes, it was very fun to think, oh, if 3 people join me, that'd be nice, but I'll go solo the dungeon if not. But I understand why that had to be. It's for everybody's benefit that I actually slow down and wait on the healer.
Well, yeah, on that note, because it's like I'm pumping out a lot more heals, and it keeps me busy, because from a healing DPS perspective, my goodness, dude, like, it just ends up being like, I get 3 options. I'm going to dot, I'm going to AoE you, or I'm going to punch you, and that's really where it's going to be. I'm going to toss over to Paul. I want to get your audio kind of idea. My AC just turned on, so I'm going to go turn it off so I don't end up having a fan throughout the rest of this podcast. So I'm going to do that. Paul, break us down on your audio. What's your score? Why is it? And I will be right back.
10 out of 5. I'm a big Final Fantasy music guy. So if we're speaking strictly about the music part of it, crank it to 11. This is awesome. The soundtrack, I heard a little bit of it, early on. And so I had a kind of a crystal ball into what some of the tracks were going to be before it launched. And I was very impressed with what I heard. And so it's different when you listen to game music and you've not played the game and you're listening to it and the nostalgia factor kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
That nostalgia factor is strong in this when I go back and listen to those tracks. So a soundtrack has to have those immediate hits that you go, whoa, what is this? I love this song. And then you have to have those ones that when you go back and listen to it, you're like, oh, I remember that zone. That was so deep. And it's got both of those.
Mm-hmm.
The standouts for me are obviously, and I'm not going to know the names of all these, but the Lahi, the Raktika zone. Mm-hmm. Lakeland at night is so beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes. The Shadowbringers theme itself is amazing.
Yes. And how they weave that into the boss fights at the end of the content.
Oh, it's so great. Now, I have a music theory in video games, especially RPGs. And that is when there are two themes that are intertwined, it makes for a better experience. And this game has it. You have the Shadowbringers theme, and you have that female vocals, that's that angelic type voice, stand tall, etc. And those are woven throughout. Final Fantasy VIII is a good example of this. You've got two themes throughout that. So it's beautifully done. It's masterfully done. Soken is a genius. Again and again, I can't give him more kudos. The rest of the audio, amazing sound effects, like that glimmer of light that shows up when a patch of light is right over you and you hear that twinkle type sound. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys crank your sound effects up, but there's some amazing sound effects in this. The vocal, like the Amaro sounds, the voices for the fairies are amazing. The vocal work in general was amazing. I never felt jarred out of it, like somebody's voice was really odd.
Yeah. And I've seen JRPGs do that to me from time to time, where it's like, oh, it's really, and then they have, and that's a trope of, I guess, of JRPGs, where at some point you have this really annoyingly talking character, and it's like, yeah, they didn't have that in this.
And the Pixie Fail had the opportunity to be that.
Yeah.
It was not. Yeah, her voice is beautiful. There wasn't anybody. Vautry, I thought was great. His transformation, even though he kept the same voice, I thought was amazing. I 10 out of 10, 10 out of 5, 5 out of 5. It's awesome.
Chris.
Oh, should have made you go last.
Yeah,
we should have known the guy that runs a podcast would have the best audio answer. Typically, I play through a game once with music on, and the second time I go back to listening to game music or mixing it in with like my own personal music library. And some games I mix different parts of my personal library than others, and sometimes it's just Pandora on shuffle. It doesn't matter. Or I'm watching Netflix, and so game music has always been something that when you're first going through a zone, it enhances that experience, right? It's like the smell to accompany food. But after that, I usually don't need it. I was actually frustrated sometimes when my mount roulette brought up a mount that I didn't want to turn off mount music because I like some of the mount music and I have some new mounts and I want to hear it. And I don't want to just burn myself out on these zone songs. But some of the mounts, the song went with the zone so much worse that it was jarring. And I resented that it interrupted my music. I was like, I was listening to that. Mm-hmm. So I was really impressed with the sound. The fights even felt like it was enhancing their personality. Like conviction is the one word that sums up this expansion for me. Like the characters had conviction, the zones felt true to themselves, and the music just felt like it was helping drive you into like that very real thing. The first to me feels more real than the source. It feels like a real place that I'm visiting, that I'm taking part in, that I have an impact on, and that when I'm away from it, I miss it. And I haven't had that with the source. And that's not for not loving this game. It's not for it not being a great game. It's not because I haven't dumped hundreds of hours in this game. It's just that they've taken it to that whole other level.
So I think for me, one of the, just talking about audio, And Chris, did you give a score? Sorry, like
5 of 5.
5 of 5, yeah.
5 of 5.
I think for me, audio, the voice actors and the acting when it comes down to it, because like you guys kind of touched on it, but I thought like, I mean, I love the music. Like I have nothing against anything that they delivered. In fact, the little subtle thing that I loved the most was the new quest accepted little riff, into the point where I love that the quests they level sync now, and that is great. So that plus the little riff, I am accepting every quest and I'm just 100%ing zones after zones, and oh, there's a quest. So I would say though, but the voice acting, unbelievable, just incredible. And then I felt like the actors really got to lean into it and play a lot with the characters, and they really kind of delivered, on the lines and everything that was written. So. 5 out of 5 for me, easily, for audio. I can't praise it enough, and I want to make sure that we stay on time because I want to talk about the last piece of it, what Shadowbringers got right and what it got wrong. Like we're overwhelmingly positive of this game, but all games are games, and there's things that can maybe have gone better or that maybe they didn't do so well. And if you guys don't have anything, I think that what it got right was clearly. Like what we talked about, the story, the environments, the gameplay, the audio. I think like it nailed it from a gameplay perspective. I really want to see more. I'm very excited to see how the next years to progress. But to kind of talk about what I feel like it got wrong was actually everything leading up to the expansion. When we looked at like no male Vieira, I don't think that was a wrong choice, but the way that they chose to release that information to the public, I think that was a misstep. I think when there was a lot of extra drama leading into like what this expansion is so freaking incredible, that I think they could have handled the fan fests a little bit differently. Because when people asked him, like at Paris, like, oh, is there a male Vieira? Because you haven't shown it. He said, well, we got one more fan fest. So they lean more into showmanship over just giving people the information and not letting people build up unrealistic expectations. Because then if they weren't going to do it, and people kept telling me I was wrong. They're like, there is going to be male Vieira. You are wrong, Brian. I'm like, I'm just trying to set your world up for for what's really happening here. Because if there was going to be a male Vieira, they would have showed it. But that's what I think, that when you look at over the 9 months leading up to the expansion from release, I think it was in how they handled certain information drops to the player base, because we saw it time and time again as content creators in the space, where it's like, oh my gosh. And so the thing that I would say that they could do better in 6.0 is to release the battle system changes the month prior to the expansion, so people can go hands-on with them, and they can ideally not necessarily either be upset or not, like at least they could go hands-on with them and give it a go. Paul.
So what they did right were all the things that we listed. I think the overall, though, is the pacing of the story. The story is amazing. So really, as a single player experience, this knocks it out of the park. If you want to go for a great Final Fantasy single player experience, 10 out of 10 for that. What they could do better, I agree with you about that lead up to Shadowbringers. My comment to that would be, I think they gave too much away before Stormblood, and this was the reaction of trying to pull back a little bit going into Shadowbringers, because I didn't know what the reaction was going to be. I don't think the reaction to Stormblood is as overwhelmingly positive as it was to Shadowbringers here. So
very true.
I think that was a little bit of damage control, but I do think that the way that they released that information was a little bit odd and could be done better next time. And I also think they need to somehow, some way, work on test servers. This whole balancing where we couldn't get healers in and whatever else. I mean, couldn't this be averted if we had extensively tested and let other players test these things? There's lots of people in the community that saw potency numbers from the media tour and was able to make guides almost that were pretty on the spot just from seeing that. There's people in this community that can help you, Yoshida-san, some of these numbers right. So let us. Why not?
So to Brian, I disagree that it's their job to deal with it at fan fests from the standpoint of people asking questions, because that means that they're hostage to our questions. So then I get to start asking, you know, how many dungeons in 7.0, and they have to answer. And if they don't answer, and if, as long as I answer it the right way, will there be 9 dungeons in 7.0? And if they don't answer it, there's not 9, they miss that opportunity to clear that up. And so like, they're definitely not hostage to us, but they do have to live with their own choices. And so like, the initial announcement should have been done better. I just don't know that answering questions is the way to do it. But definitely coming out and doing those reveals a little cleaner. I don't know why they do as many reveals as they do. I don't know why we get the battle system changes so far in advance if they're not going to do test realms, because there was, all it does is give us, it allows a certain group of people to say my class is ruined and they quit the game. And it allows a certain group of people to say this class is going to be broken. And then when it's not, they're disappointed. And then that's it. There's nobody that's like, oh, what an interesting piece of context. I will level multiple jobs and really enjoy this. Thank you for revealing that to me. I now feel more balanced about the game. It does nothing positive. It can only make a certain group of people mad, and everybody else says, wait and see. So I don't know why they don't. If you're not going to do test servers, if you're not going to give people the actual potency numbers in time to make guides and set expectations, if you're not going to roll them out in a pre-patch, some like 4.599 where we can play with them in Stormblood content, which is still out of context. If you're not going to do that, then stop showing us battle system changes until the patch notes when the servers are already offline. That would be my thoughts. Like, I just think it averts the most chance for disaster, because now that we're here, now we can make these decisions with the extremes in mind and things like that. My issue with the game, besides everything, I know on the channel I've nitpicked at a few things and definitely shared all that. But the one thing that, like, in this conversation that I really wish was different is it was a really great single player experience. I loved the story. I wish there was a way to tell it where I didn't have what felt like 3 to 4 hours of content where all I killed was one coyote. Like, I don't know if that's releasing a 2-hour cutscene the day before the expansion drops that I can watch while the servers are down. I don't know if that's a way to have the initial quests be narrated and voiced over as I run through a zone killing things. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the answer is. I just know that you told me how great the battle system changes were, and I was so excited to do them. And you gave me an axe like every hour on the hour, and I only got to swing each axe like 6 times outside of the dungeons. And so I loved the story, but I just felt conflicted that, like, there were times that I wanted to get back to playing the game. I'm having fun, but, like, can we also play the game? You know, like when you're sitting in a card game with friends and they're just sitting there talking, you're like, I'm enjoying the talking, guys, but, like, we came here to play cards. So, like, somebody hasn't taken a turn in 10 minutes. Like, can somebody please just roll the dice or play the card or whatever step is next? So I think and maybe that's just my personal pacing that feels that way. But that's the one thing I wish the expansion could find a way to do the same experience, maybe a little better.
So, Paul, where can people find you? What do you got coming up to share as a part of Gathered Together? Where can people find you?
You can find us at our website, www.gtffxiv.com. You can find us on Twitter at gtffxiv. You can find us on Stitcher, on iTunes. Just search for Gather Together. If it's a podcast host, you can find us. What we got coming up, we just released our Impressions episode. No spoilers, but our spoiler episode will launch next Thursday or Friday. And just stay tuned. We're going to have some contests coming up in the near future. And I believe in the very near future, you two will be joining us for an episode. So stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to be able to kind of collab with you some more.
Thank you for having me.
Oh man, dude, it was a blast. I had so much fun also hanging out with you at the Gather to Game event. So for those of you who were able to make it, we love you guys. That was so much fun. We'll be sure to do something again like that in the future. Obviously, whenever we feel like we can step away from our computers long enough, etc. Chris, what do you got coming up? What are you working on? Where can people find us?
So I'm working on my first round of class guides. Brian and I drafted all the classes, so those hopefully get to you faster. So that'll be Warrior first, hopefully Gunbreaker right behind it. I'm still keeping my WoW account live and active, planning on playing some WoW Classic. I don't know where that fits into my 14 schedule. So, like, unfortunately, 14 came out with an incredible amount of content I want to get to, and August 27th didn't change as a result of that. It's still coming. So I've got to get through that. Otherwise, just thanks to Paul for coming on. You're my go-to car podcast. Brian talks about sitting back and listening and it being relaxing. There's nothing about relaxing about when I'm listening to you because I'm usually sitting in rush hour, but I appreciate you taking that edge off. You guys are the relaxing portion. It's just that guy in front of me.
Just don't fall asleep.
And so,
yeah.
I appreciate you. It's very conversational. It just feels like there's a pair of people sitting in the car with me, and I can just listen and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you.
So for next week, or actually this coming week, because this is recorded a little bit close to publish, where we usually have a little bit of a gap, but we're going to have Larry Czar back on the podcast talking about the Eden raid this coming week. We're still trying to get Say No to Rage. He had to cancel again, so we're working on getting him as well as some other content creators rolling out. We've got a wide schedule, so we got Happy coming up here in a week after that. We've got Az from Heels versus Babyface coming up, and more. So it's going to be a fun couple of months of podcasts that we just keep rolling. So guys, keep hitting us with your suggestions of people you want to have and see on this podcast to talk about pretty much anything and everything like RPG, MMO, multiplayer games. I really, that's kind of our bread and butter and what we love to talk about. Because I'm 100% with you, Chris. Like, yeah, it felt like I was able to kind of enjoy a single player game, but at the same time with my friends, and that's, you know, filling up multiple experience bars, and that just feels as a working adult, like if I can be multitasking and doing all this stuff and more, it's gonna be great. Anyway, guys, let's go ahead and wrap it up. For Work to Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
And I'm Paul.
Yeah, like a pro. Thanks so much for watching or listening wherever podcast services are enjoyed. We thank you guys for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.
No, I like y'all's podcast. Just feels like a couple of friends in the car. Actually, I catch myself most podcasts I just listen to. I listen to a lot of like NPR podcasts and like stuff you should know and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I love NPR podcasts.
I just like all the learning. But with you guys, what's different is I always catch myself like talking back. I'm like, well, of course that was coming, and like, and then that's totally fine, except when my wife has told me it's my turn to pick a podcast and we pick you guys, and she's like, who are you talking to? Like, I don't care. I don't play Final Fantasy. You don't. She goes, do I need to pause it and listen to you talk about something I don't care about? Like, is that what's happening here?
That's great. And like, even if you're yelling at us, I mean, at least it feels conversational.